Hello students, and welcome back to this class which we have been continuing from the previous edition. That means the previous video that we are continuing with microorganisms, friend and foe. That is in the chapter 2 of your textbook. Now, for those of you who are listening on the radio, I would suggest that you have your textbook with you so that you can refer to your textbook as we go on. And let's go back to the beginning where we talk about microorganisms, how we were introduced to these microorganisms. Now, when we go back, we found that they are classified into 4 groups. Yes, they are classified into 4 groups. They are called bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and algae. So they are classified into 4 groups. Now, we even discussed about the virus. We discussed about the virus, but why we don't consider them as microorganisms is because they are non-living, correct? Right? They are non-living because they cannot survive outside the cell or a host. They cannot survive. So that is why they are non-living organisms. We science people we consider them as non-living organisms because they will never survive in the environment. But in the atmosphere. But inside a cell or a host, they survive. They can get the nutrients from there. They are getting all the they are getting all the nutrients, and then they are reproducing inside their host, and so that's what we learn. Now, and where do we find the microorganisms? Can you remember? Yes, they are all around us. They live, they are living in the environment around us. They are living in our bodies, in our clothes. So you will find microorganisms in all the environments that we discussed before. Yes, from the very even for there are environments where we human cannot go, where we human cannot reach. But when we look there also, you will find the microorganisms surviving there. They are living there. So these microorganisms, we can find them in all sorts of environment, from the as I've said before, from the hot springs, even near the volcanoes, active volcanoes, and then to the very, very cold climates also. They can survive. So these these are all the areas or the places where they are living. And now as we are talking about microorganisms, we talk about some friendly microorganisms which are our friends. We talk about that, and then how they are how they are beneficial for us, how they help us in our daily lives, how they helped us in our health. So let's return back to the friendly microorganisms. Like, for example, we learn to make curd. We learn to make curd with we learn to make curd with a warm milk, and learned how lactobacillus converts this milk into curd for us, the tasty curd. So and then remember how these microorganisms clean up our environment. I told you they were our sweeper because they they work on the wastage, they work on the garbages, they work on all this organic waste, and they return all these complex compounds which have been manufactured by animals and plants. So they are returning all these complex compounds back to the soil in simple nitrogen compounds. So these microorganisms, we say that they are our friends because of all these activities that they do for us. Now, and then there was this thing about medicine, where microorganisms helps us in making medicines for us. Let's try to think about that scientist who was working on some bacteria, and he was working on some disease-causing bacteria, and how he accidentally found antibiotics. Do you remember that scientist? Yes, it's Alexander Fleming. He discovered these antibiotics in 1929 while working on this disease-causing bacteria. And how you remember how those bacteria, how those molds are formed in the culture plate where he was working. So, and then let's also recapitulate on how not only the vaccine, not only the antibiotics, but vaccine, how they work. Do you remember? Okay. We had taken an example of some disease called measles as an example for how how vaccines work. Now, let's quickly recap. Let's quickly go through that again. Now, when a vaccine is produced, that vaccine, as I've said before, that vaccine contains the dead and weak disease-causing microbe. That microorganisms have been killed, or it has been made so weak that it can, it will not affect you. And then that microorganism which has been made very weak and dead or and weak, that microorganism, when it is introduced, when it is injected, when it is introduced in a healthy body, this body starts to produce antibodies. Antibodies are those compounds, a chemical compound, which will keep on fighting. They will keep on fighting with that microbe which is infecting your body. And once that antibodies finish off the dead or weak disease-causing microbe that we have introduced in the healthy body, the antibodies will remain in your body it will remain in your body, and as it remains in your body, it remembers how to fight that disease. It remembers how to kill that disease. That's how vaccines work. And as we said before, that is what our scientists are trying to find in this pandemic. They're trying to find a vaccine that can keep on fighting the virus that is attacking our body. They are trying to find that antibody which can kill the virus and also remember in future how to fight that virus whenever it appears again. So that is what all the scientists around us in the world are trying to find. Now, those are the friendly microorganisms around us in our neighborhood, in and around us. So, but then not all the microorganisms are friendly, as I have said before. Some are very, they cause a lot of distress to us. They are they are our enemy. Now, as we discussed about the harmful microorganisms like the malaria as before, where the disease is caused by a microorganisms called Plasmodium. That Plasmodium, when it enters your body, as it enters your body, it gets the nutrient from your body, and then when it gets the nutrients, it starts to reproduce, and when it reproduces, and when it reproduces, during the time it causes all that fever which is associated with malaria. And then let's think of those harmful microorganisms that are spread by animals, or let's say insects. For example, a housefly. See, a housefly, we don't like them coming into our house. Why? Because these houseflies, they visit all sorts of places. They will sit on the dead and decaying matter. They will sit on the excreta of animals, and so as it goes on visiting all those waste and dead and decaying matter, what happens is that in the body of a fly has very small hairs, and as it sits on the say the excreta of an animal, what happens? There are some disease-causing microbes there. So those microbes get stuck to the hair of the flies on the body of the flies. So when the fly comes into your house, and if it sits on your food, if you have kept food which is uncovered, and then the flies come and sit on it, then that microbes which is on the hair of the fly, it gets transferred to your food. And as it gets transferred to your food, and if you eat that, what happens? You become sick, and then there are cases where called food poisoning. All these are caused because of that microbe, which is there in that food, and we call that food as a contaminated food, because that those microorganisms have come and sat on that food, and that the food which was not covered. So that is why your parents, your teachers tells you not to eat food not to buy and eat uncovered food on the roadside. This is the reason why we tell you not to buy all those foods which are uncovered. Okay. So now, and then all these insects like the mosquito and flies, they like to live around our surroundings, because, for example, the mosquito, they live around our houses when we have stagnant water. Stagnant water, they like to live there because they are able to reproduce in there. So that is why it is always good to clean your surrounding, so that there will be no stagnant water, and so there will be no breeding ground for the mosquito, and then this malaria will not be, it can minimized, or it will not affect you, as the mosquitoes are not there anymore in your surrounding. Now, what about the animals? We have been talking about you and me, human, uh, uh, getting diseases from this. What about animals? Yes, our animals, they do get infected by these microorganisms. There are certain diseases. For example, these days, if you look at the news, you'll find that there is a swine flu in neighboring states. What is what is happening is this microorganism or is affecting that animal, the pigs. So that disease is spreading in that neighboring state. That is why even our government have banned the import of pigs from the neighboring states. It's all because of these microorganisms that has caused the trouble in the animal. And then there are, even in the cow, in the cattle, there are certain microorganisms which are very dangerous. For example, anthrax. Anthrax is a disease caused by a bacteria. It's a bacteria which is very deadly for human being too. Not only to the cattle, for the human being. So all these diseases are, they are caused by the microbes in the animals too. Now, what about the plants? When we look at the plants also, you will find that if you look carefully at plants, you'll find that sometimes in the leaves there are certain lesions or spots or etc. So all these are certain microorganisms, maybe some bacteria or some fungi or some protozoa, which are, or even algae, which are infecting the plants. For example, let's take a lemon or citrus fruit. A citrus fruit, there is a particular disease called the citrus canker. What happened to that fruit is that on the leaf or on the fruit, there will be some spotting. You will notice in spots on the fruit or on the leaf. That disease, that is a disease caused by microorganisms, and because of that, these lesions means that spots which have occurred in the leaf and the fruit. Those are the microorganisms affecting the fruit. Or when you look at a potato, for example, sometimes you cut the potato and you find that inside the potato you find that there are some colored part. Those are some microorganisms. You need a microscope to look, because that microscope, without a microscope you will not be able to see that microorganism. Yes, that potato it will not affect the human. It will not affect human at all. But that potato, if you keep together with another potato, then the whole lot will be affected. And if your parents are a farmer, that potato, if you keep it as a seed, then the whole field will be affected. So that is why most farmers, they will try to pick out all those, and then they will keep only the unaffected potatoes. So these microorganisms, they can even infect the plants too. Now, and then coming to our homes. Let's say you go to the shop, to the market, you buy some meat, some vegetables, and then you bring home those food. And if you are not able to consume those food in time when they are fresh, what happens to those say, let's say you have bought some meat and vegetables? What will happen if you're not able to consume them? Then they will turn bad. Yes. For example, a tomato. If you keep it like that, it will become rotten. Or even meat. So how do why do they turn bad? It's because these microbes, they like the food that we like, the food that we eat. They also like that to eat that. So they will come and attack. They will come and attack that food. They will come and attack the vegetables and meat that we keep. So how do we prevent that? How do we prevent? Many of us, we have tried making achars, and then most of us, so those are some ways in preventing the microorganisms to come. For example, you take meat, you take raw meat, and then if you cover it with salt, dry salt, then you'll find that your meat will not get spoiled. Yes. Next time you try that. Your meat, if you cover it with dry salt, then your meat will not get spoiled easily, because salt is a chemical which microorganisms hate. They don't like that. Or, for example, you take some chilies. If you want to preserve some chilies, then you put some edible oil, like your mustard oil. You put some edible oil and then you keep it. Then you'll find that your chilies remain green for a long time, because edible oil is a sort of a preservative also, and it acts as a barrier between your vegetable and the microbes. So it serves like a wall where the microbes cannot climb. Now in lower classes, when you were in class 6, class 7, you learned about a certain bacteria called the bacterium rhizobium. Especially in class 7, you have learned that. You have read about that. And you have learned that this rhizobium, they fix atmospheric nitrogen. Atmospheric nitrogen, that's what you learned in class 7. Now, here, let's think of our atmosphere, the air around us. The air around us, 78% of the air around us is nitrogen. Don't believe that. Don't believe that it's all oxygen. It's not that. 78% of the air that we breathe is nitrogen, and this nitrogen, the plants cannot use that nitrogen directly. It cannot do that. So what happened here is that this nitrogen which is in the atmosphere, it needs to be converted to some nitrogen compound which can be used by plants. Without that, plants also will not get the required nutrients. So how does this atmospheric nitrogen go to the soil? That is done by, yes, the bacterium rhizobium, right? The bacteria. It fixes, or it takes the atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into it fixes the nitrogen, the atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogenous compound. Now, not only that bacteria, even there is blue-green algae which can fix nitrogen. Now, and then during the fixing of nitrogen, not only with that, there is during these days, during these monsoon days, you'll find that there is lots of lightning. Now, when there is a lightning, as I said, there are lots of nitrogen in the atmosphere. When there is a lightning, those nitrogens are also fixed by the lightning. So now we have the atmospheric nitrogen, and then the nitrogen fixing bacteria, and then the lightning. So this will fix the atmospheric nitrogen into a nitrogenous compound. Now, when the nitrogenous compound, that nitrogen which have been fixed by the bacteria and by the lightning, this nitrogen compound will go to the soil. It is in the soil. Now, from the soil, plants. Plants will take up that nitrogen compound, and then that compound which the plant have taken up, it's the plants during its various processes in the plants, it will convert that into many different compound. Those compounds will be eaten by animals, and then the animals will eat that plant. The animal will eat that plant, and then as the animal die, or as the animal, the excreta of the animals are released into the atmosphere, the environment or the soil, then this waste are returned to the soil, even at that animal. So this nitrogenous compound are returned to the soil, and then that in the soil some of the nitrogen compound will return to the plants again, and at the same time the bacteria will also keep working on those waste. Those bacteria which we have talked about, they are still going to work on those waste, and then this bacteria will convert the nitrogen compounds into atmospheric nitrogen again. Okay, so now we see from one side we have gone down, and then from the bacteria it has returned the nitrogen back into the atmosphere. So all the time our atmosphere percentage of nitrogen does not decrease, because on one side the nitrogen fixing bacteria and the blue-green algae are fixing the nitrogen into nitrogen compound, and then there is the bacteria returning the nitrogen back into the atmosphere, and we find that it forms a cycle. It forms a complete cycle which is called the cycle. Remember that this nitrogen cycle is an important cycle, and you will find this diagram of the cycle, which it's easy to remember. It's on the last page of your lesson, and if you look at it carefully, then you'll find it's very easy to remember if you look at that diagram. And I want you to please remember this cycle, because nitrogen cycle is very important in science from this class to the next in class 9, 10, even when you go up to class 11, 12 and you take up science also, this nitrogen cycle will continue to be with you. That is why it's very important that you remember this nitrogen cycle. Now let's just recapitulate this cycle. We have the atmospheric nitrogen, the bacteria and blue-green algae which are going to fix the nitrogen, and then the lignin also which is going to fix nitrogen. Now this nitrogen compound, the fixed nitrogen is in turn fixed into nitrogenous compound by the bacteria, and then that nitrogen compound is taken by the plants, and the plants in turn are eaten by the animals, and then the animal waste, the dead and decay matter of the animal, they return the nitrogen waste back to the soil, and from the soil some bacteria, again the bacteria will work on this dead and decaying matter, and it will return the nitrogen, it will turn the nitrogen compound, reduce the nitrogen compound into simple, atmospheric nitrogen. So with that, our lesson on microorganisms ends. But I want you to remember. I want you to remember certain things here in this lesson. Number one, microorganisms. What are the groups? How many groups of microorganisms are there? There are 4, remember, right? Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and algae. So there are 4 of them. You remember that? And then where do they live? They live in the environment around us. They live, they are in the environment around us. They are living in our, even in the bodies, in our bodies. They are living in our clothes, right? Remember that. And then our friendly microorganisms, the friends that we, today we have made new friends with microbes. Some new friends like the lactobacillus, which makes curd for us, right? Dahi, very tasty dahi for us. So you remember that lactobacillus, right? Those bacteria, which are beneficial for us. You remember that, and you also remember the antibiotics which are produced by the microorganisms. The antibiotics which is discovered by Alexander Fleming, right? Alexander Fleming, and then what was the name of the antibiotics which he discovered? Penicillin, right? Penicillin. So those are some products of microorganisms that you have to remember, and also the vaccine, how the vaccine works, how they fight with the weak microbe, how they fight with the weak microbe, and how they remember to fight the strong one later in future, right? That is how vaccine works, right? So you have to, you remember that, and then you also remember about the doctor's prescription, why we should always we should follow the doctor's prescription. It should be, let me tell you once more that you should always remember to follow the doctor's prescription. Otherwise, in future, if the microorganisms come into your body, then the microbes will know how to fight the antibiotics. That's why you have to finish the prescription, right? So with that, and then also that, as I've said just now about the nitrogen cycle, remember that, memorize that, keep that locked in your head. Okay, so remember that. Now, and as we end, I want you to keep reading your textbook. It's the best notes that you have. So keep reading your textbook, and subscribe to this channel if you have not done. Then in the next classes also, you will be able to find the next classes very, very easily if you subscribe to this channel. So with that, thank you.